Thanks for having me, and hello, everybody. I'll talk a bit about sort of a longer term, higher level kind of perspective and on the evolution of people and brains and the invention of grandma's digital life and social credit scores, and then a bit how life is information. And life is information. It's either encoded in biochemistry or encoded in digital form increasingly. And we're evolving to from a biochemical form of life into a hybrid electronic biochemical form, and possibly into a purely electronic form. And as we evolve as biological creatures, our tools evolve with us in recent times. And just as we're evolving, the technology is evolving as well, interdependently with humans. So as we improve ourselves, our tools improve, which in turn improve us. And it's a coevolution process. And to step back a bit in time, the Earth started about 4.5 billion years ago, and the first life started roughly around 4 billion years ago, and evolved into cells, which is a container that allows the biochemistry to happen in the safety of a cell. The single cells evolved into multi-cells or multicellular organisms in some cases, which is a community of cells that at first cooperate and then eventually differentiate into different functions of an organism. Brains and eyes evolved about 500 million years ago, and you don't really need a brain if you don't move. And so sensors like eyes and brains evolved with animals that moved, and that was about 500 million years ago. And this was a major change in evolution from pure biochemistry to information, which is from the sensors like eyes, and the processing of that information in the brains that led to an explosion of diversity. And then very recently, a couple million years ago, tools use evolved in humans and a few other species. And this also is accelerating the change of diversity and the change in life. And even more recently, the evolution invented grandmothers in a couple species, humans primarily. Killer whales is another example. And grandmothers is unusual in many species, in that the mother lives longer than her reproductive capabilities. And this is because the wisdom learned by the grandmother in her breeding lifetime allows her to help her offspring's offspring survive better with the information that she remembers and learns. And this has improved the survivability of humans as a species. The next major invention was fire, and fire allowed not just heating, but also cooking of food. And by cooking foods, meat in particular, they could be chewed and digested much more efficiently, and allowed the evolution of bigger, more complex brains and a more efficient lifestyle with more time to evolve tools and other things. The next major innovation of evolution was electricity, which you could include internet in electricity as a controlled form of fire that also allows processing of information. And it's quite likely that the next most important evolutionary stage for humans is the invention of AI, where the electricity becomes smarter and giving it memory and processing, so about the past and about the future. And so the sort of evolution of humans' milestones are these. And now brains are made up of parts, and there's lots of different parts of the brain, and they do different things coordinated together. But most of the parts are operating at a subconscious level. And we have our senses that are what is coming into our brain from the outside, and we process it. And there's the senses we're familiar with of touch, taste, vision, hearing, and smell. And then the connection to the body. And all of these things are coordinated in a way, but they're information about the present moment. And what the brain is doing is taking the signals from the present moment from the senses in the body and comparing it against what happened in the past and a bit projecting about what's happening in the future. And this creates sort of a mind-body problem, and the mind and the body don't always coordinate well. But the evolution of these different processing layers of the brain, there's a theory called the Triune Brain, an old theory of evolution of how the brain of different species evolve, from reptiles to mammals to primates and higher level creatures like humans and dolphins. Where the reptilian part of the brain came first is still in reptiles. A little bit more social, cultural in mammals, and then the abstract thinking in the cortex. And this is sort of a three-level brain where the interior is the original reptile functionality. Then the mammalian brain, the limbic system primarily, and the cortex is more human. And these subdivide different characteristics. So the reptilian brain is basic survival, breeding, hunger, functions of the body, that type of thing. And then the limbic system is more of a level of feeling of yourself and your close relatives and tribe, in a sense. And then thinking is more about the past and the future. And so it seems as though in this evolutionary stage, another layer is evolving to deal with the past and the future and memory and processing, and that's a layer of the internet. And the internet isn't necessarily inside the skull, but it adds to the capacity of living that's beyond the scope of what can be done in biochemistry. And so the internet is kind of an extension of our cortex and our thinking that improves our survival capability. And it has not just visual, auditory information, but tactile and so forth, and interactive. And the interface between the internet and the brain is evolving quickly. But there's not just phones, but glasses are coming soon, headphones and masks of various kinds that have been appearing. And so these are all intermediaries between our biological senses and the real regular world, and then the internet world. And these are getting more comprehensive with augmented and virtual reality interfaces that includes things for your hands. And the logical extension of this trend is to something where your eyes and ears and head and face are kind of covered into perhaps a undesirable characteristic. And this is advancing in many ways, sometimes in military applications and so forth, where the interface between the person and the environment is intermediated by tech. And then there's other layers, like cars are getting smarter and buildings getting smarter, and our body and brain sit inside the intelligence that is primarily connected to the internet. Newer technologies of implanting things under the skin, such as cochlear implants, which have been around for 30 years in use in humans, which are electrodes directly into the brain, and then an interface between the interior tissues and the outer electronic things, or things like smart dust, which are small particle computers that transmit to the from inside the blood and inside the cells to the outside of the brain, or newer technologies such as Neuralink, which is planting electrodes deep in the brain with a interface layer on the outside, or new imaging type technologies like kernel, which can read and write with tissues inside the brain, are improving the bandwidth and the interconnected intimacy between the internet and the brain. And the social aspects of these are a little bit awkward, in that when you're covering your face and you're attaching your body to electronics, you're less of a biosocial person, and this can go wrong in some cases, where the person who is immersed in a virtual reality might be less in control of their body and their social interaction, and unpredictable things can happen. And so our interface to the internet through our phone is a lot around connecting to people and information, and how you connect to people is evolving very rapidly. And people get dependent on their interface to the internet, and it compromises their interpersonal interaction, where things like touch and normal interpersonal human contact are often disrupted by distractions of the internet. But nonetheless, people are becoming more attached to their devices, to the internet, than they are to each other in physical reality. And this is likely causing a disease that will likely need to be cured, but exactly how that works is yet to be figured out. And the normal biological connection between brains is a concept sometimes referred to as limbic resonance, which is your brain synchronizing with mine based on not just our words, but our posture and our feelings and the set and setting of what we're doing together. And this creates sort of a shared consciousness, or a connection between people that is more than the sum of its parts. And the examples of this, of limbic connections, this is a collection of swallows that are not touching physically, and they're in a limbic resonance between each other, and the individual organisms behave in a collective whole like a connected multicellular organism with a collective behavior like that. And this is a biological trait that can be interfered with the internet, but possibly enhanced for coordinated effort. And this is an emerging area. This limbic consciousness or limbic resonance can happen between humans, where they're working in coordination and not necessarily always for good. These coordinated individual organisms create sort of a shared entity. So for example, these trees, you notice, don't touch each other, and they invest the effort into collecting the sunlight as efficiently as possible for the group, where they naturally don't overlap each other because they're cooperating. And this is partly physical between them, and then connections between the trees through the root systems and the mycelium networks that connect the trees, are essentially the internet of soils and biology that create an integrated multicellular kind of life. And how the trees decide what to do is based a bit on reputation and how people decide to coordinate or not. The traditional method is sort of a social credit ranking done largely by the judgment of communities. And in this case, grandmothers looking at the behavior of individuals and deciding who works well with who and how to keep the society more cohesive and connected. And this is evolving into credit scores as the not only are things about us, but about our past and our behaviors are digitized and recorded into the internet and then ranked as to our reliability or trustability or citizen fitness. And this in the US is for example, your credit score, your FICO score, or your criminal record. And in China, they're doing this even more intensively, which is recording all of your transactions and your behaviors to rank you up in your credit score or down. So for example, if you jaywalk across the street and the camera recognizes you and the automatic system debits your credit score for transgression and your credit score goes down. Or if you volunteer in a hospital, for example, your credit score goes up. And people start with the neutral credit score, and it can increase or decrease based on your behavior in a game type of mechanism. And people in many parts of the world think that this is an intense control of the population using AI and data and the internet. But people in countries that do this more intensively, some of them feel it's makes society safer, reduces crime, it increases trust, it makes things more efficient. And it's whether people like it or not, it's happening very rapidly in many countries of the world. And so as humans, we can either choose to participate all in on the internet attraction and addition and putting ourselves in the internet and our ranking and so forth, or we can resist it and say, I don't want to be part of that society. And that creates kind of a speciation event potentially, where there are those humans that participate in this AI internet society and those that reject it. And it may end up that we create two different species of humans, the internet connected and the Neanderthal equivalent. And over time, the socially connected humans survived, and the other species of humans have gone extinct. And so this is hackable in that because life is information, the code for life is encoded in DNA, and the DNA is editable now, both in reading and writing, and you can change the characteristics of life by changing the DNA in much the same way as computers, and the code is editable, where the computer codes in ones and zeros and binary, and you can change the characteristics of the computer by changing the code, or change the characteristics of the life by changing the code. And then at a higher abstraction of hacking the biology, our consciousness can be changed by what we eat, for example. So uppers like caffeine can change our consciousness, or downers like opiates can change them down. Outers, as Michael Pollan likes to call them, like psychedelics, can change our perception to contemplate our senses differently. And inner, like a meditation, can affect our consciousness and our interaction with others. And so the extension of our experience of life is sort of our local mind in the present moment. And this is expanding exponentially into the universe and potentially multiverse, which is what's beyond the universe, where with people moving to Mars and expansion beyond the local physical planet, or expanding inward, where the internet is kind of a interior space where you're physically in the same place, but your mind is journeying into a deeper data. And that includes things like the metaverse, which is sort of a physical manifestation of reality that's inside the internet. So it's exponentially bigger going down and exponentially bigger going up. But in either case, it's exponential beyond the here and now of the present moment. And so when the eyes and brains were first invented by evolution, it created a phenomenon known as the Cambrian Explosion, where as soon as information and brains became part of creatures, there was an explosion in the diversity of different kinds of experiments, of different kinds of creatures that accelerated from a few species to millions of different kinds of species. And I would guess that this AI added to human life will create a kind of Cambrian explosion of diversity of different strategies of how to survive and how to live in an information-rich world. And so further into the future, the information aspect of life is less constrained by biochemistry. And so we're changing from being primarily a biochemical type of organism limited by the scope of biochemistry into a hybrid electronic biochemical creatures, where the information aspect of who I am and how I function and what I think about is increasingly electronic, and it's accelerating much, much faster than the information capacity of the biochemistry. And so basically we are already information, and we're becoming increasingly information. And the information that is us is, as I mentioned, partly biochemical and partly electronic, but our experience of life, our consciousness is surfing along the flow of that information as opposed to the information itself. And so there, just to wrap up, we are information, the information flows. The information characteristics are evolving by natural selection, which ones are favored and which are not. There's a rapidly accelerating complexity of these different hybrid forms of life, and they're changing at a exponentially fast pace. And so that's the basic concept, and this obviously impacts business, but in a longer term, like where are we going kind of way, and where have we been? And so I'm happy to discuss this if people have any questions.